Eagles in the 1970s, Nirvana in the early 90s, the Smiths in the 1980s. What unites all of these storied musical artists? Well, the fact that, for whatever reason, their reputation far outstrips their actual musical talent.
Yikes.
Making them some of the most overrated bands of their day. And while I'd love to make you angry by talking about each of those, today we're going back just a bit further in time. I'm Nostalgic Nick with Do You Remember? And today we're looking at the most overrated bands of the 1960s. And before everyone comes for my throat, let's remind us the definition of overrated. It does not mean bad. It does not mean untalented. It simply means overvalued. That's it. So yes, we will be a bit harsh on some of your favorites from yesteryear. Just remember, even the most overrated bands of the 1960s is quite possibly better than most stuff you'll hear today. So there, I said that. Now before we begin, make sure you hit that thumbs up icon before you're too mad at me. And subscribe to our channel for more nostalgia. But come on, let's get to the bands. The Doors. 8 consecutive gold LPs, over 1 million records sold worldwide, and a reputation as one of the greatest rock bands ever. But I think we can all collectively agree that the Doors are nothing short of mediocre. The faux mysticism of their lyrics masquerading as some deeper truth sure becomes grating rather quickly.
A piece of music that's just a pure expression of joy.
And while no one argues that Ray Manzarek on the organ absolutely shreds, it is an instrument that needs to make a comeback in rock music. The real question mark here is of course Jim Morrison. Was he a poet, or just a slovenly drunken buffoon? I mean, imagine one of the world's biggest stars exposing himself on stage in front of thousands of fans today. Forget Righteous Rebel, he'd probably TikTok himself out of fame quite quickly. The Doors are fine, they're good, but that's about it. The Byrds. Let's move on to the Byrds. They are, in fact, an okay band. They're not terrible at all. But when such adulation as one of the best and most influential bands of the 60s rains down upon you, you really gotta be pretty great. And the problem with the Byrds is that no matter what type of rock they tackle, be it folk rock with Turn, 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 or psychedelia with 8 Miles High, the Byrds tend to release a watered-down, sanitized, and ultimately boring version of that genre, when someone else is far better at it. They even managed to take one of the most moving, fantastic songs of all time, Bob Dylan's Tambourine Man, and turn that into a okay decent song. The Byrds, a perfectly acceptable band, but not as great as people think. Cream. Take one of the greatest guitar players of all time, Eric Clapton, pair him with a virtuoso bassist and a lights-out drummer, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker respectively, and wham! What do you get? In all honesty, a sum far less than the respective parts. Listening to Cream sounds like 3 musical gods got together, not to write and play great songs, but rather as an exercise in showing off each individual's musical skill. And while you are certainly able to appreciate each individual's mastery of their craft, it just leaves you wanting more. And don't get me started on their self-indulgent live shows, with songs lasting well over 10 minutes each. So yes, break out your Cream records if you want to hear fantastic musicianship, but if you want to listen to good music, look elsewhere. Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Gary and the Playboys was a small-time band playing at the esteemed venue Disneyland in the early 60s, when a studio executive suggested adding Gary's last name to the band's, as Gary's father was the famous comedian Jerry Lewis.
No, that's my mistake, Dad. It was your line because you've got to introduce myself in a Playboy.
This riding of the proverbial coattails obviously worked. And soon the band had a record deal, #1 song, This Diamond Ring, and had booked a date to play live on The Ed Sullivan Show. The problem was the actual band members barely played on their hit song. The studio had so many session musicians and overdubs on the album that the band was unable to replicate the song live. Well, that's a problem. So the band mimed playing while Gary sang, which is not very rock and roll. Somehow, this band with almost no musical talent went on to have a string of hits, making them one of the most overrated bands of their day. If only we could all have famous fathers. The Beatles. No, you didn't hear that wrong, unfortunately. And before you shoot the messenger, let me remind you this isn't a list of bad bands, but merely overrated bands. And while the Beatles are indeed one of the greatest musical acts of all time, ensuring that internal songwriting became a cornerstone of rock, helping to invent numerous genres including psychedelic and heavy metal, pioneering incredibly inventive recording techniques, etc. Yes, I know, the list of their accomplishments is exhaustive, but I would have to argue that the veneration and hero worship shown to the Fab Five is far beyond the reach of any band. Thousands of hysterical fans chasing them through the streets, fainting and screaming so loud at concerts you can't hear the actual music. The extent of Beatlemania was so great that any band faced with that is by definition, overrated. Sorry, Paul, if you're watching, you're still fantastic. The Monkees. Now, moving on from the Beatles, we have the fake Beatles, or more specifically, the Monkees, because the Monkees were indeed a fake band, created by TV executives for a sitcom of the same name.
We're being invaded by Martians!
Specifically to capitalize on the hysteria of Beatlemania. The studio that recorded their first albums even thought so little of each band member's musical ability that they recorded the songs almost exclusively with session musicians. Which, I mean, come on. While the Monkees did release some absolute bangers, I'm a believer, I'm looking at you. The fact that they didn't really write or record the songs that people still listen to firmly plants them in this territory, especially as many younger fans aren't really aware of their contrived conception. Grateful Dead. There are very few bands that create such polarizing opinions as the Grateful Dead. On one hand, you have a die-hard legion of devoted fans, Deadheads, who travel the country following their favorite band as if it was the Messiah.
Like, everybody's coming here because they think there's an answer here, that we'll all learn it together and stuff.
And then you have everyone else, whose reaction to this devotion is, why? Because unless you're turning on, tuning in, and dropping out. Yes, that is a drug reference, kids. Then the Dead have like 3 good songs and lots of endless, aimless jams that seem almost interminable. And then we get their live shows, which anyone who's not flying high on mushrooms must find absolutely interminable. Also, the simple fact that the travesty that is the band Phish is a direct descendant of the Grateful Dead's ethos is another huge strike against them. Their fans are incredibly loyal, but for everyone else, overrated for sure. The Dave Clark 5. If some of you younger viewers are staring at your screens in confusion, wondering who the heck the Dave Clark 6 are, 5, oh my bad, that's completely understandable. Their music was unavailable for purchase anywhere from 1978 to 1993, and it wasn't until 2019 that their whole discography was made available to the public. But I can assure you, they were one of the biggest bands of the mid-60s, even appearing on Ed Sullivan 18 times. But what were they like, you ask? Picture the buttoned-up, boring Beatles, or if the Beatles never discovered weed or LSD, and their musical sound evolved not one bit from their first album to their last. All in all, the Dave Clark 5 were good back then, but they did not age well. The Who. And finally we get The Who, a band that had 2 distinct phases. both of which are distinctly overrated. First, they rose to fame as 20-year-old rebels, railing against the establishment in songs like Won't Get Fooled Again. And maybe it's the effect of 50 years hindsight, but this rebellion just seems silly now. I really don't think anyone is complaining about Pete Townshend's generation anymore. And hearing Roger Daltrey sing I Hope I Die Before I Get Old just makes one laugh, as the geezer is currently 78 years young, I guess. And then The Who shifted into artsy mode and released a series of rock operas that didn't completely hit the mark. I mean, Pinball Wizard is world class, but please don't make me sit through the overwrought storytelling that is Quadrophenia. A good band, okay, a very good band, but not one of the best of all time. There you have them, the most overrated bands of the 1960s. And I have droned on too much, so now it's your turn to get in the comments. Which huge group from the 1960s is massively overrated? Which band's inclusion on our list made you spitting mad? Are there any deadheads losing their minds, crafting their retorts? Well, this is all in good fun, of course, so get in the comments and tell me why they don't belong there, and who actually does. Click that thumbs up icon before you go, and subscribe to our channel for more nostalgia. But from all of us here at Do You Remember, I am massively overrated, and have a great day.